An economic system should serve the people. People are not born to serve an economic system, but we're not in a depression, to which I would respond by quoting Martin Luther King. If it happens to rich people, they call it a depression. If it happens to poor people, they call it a social problem.
I just want to start out by welcoming you into this conversation, Marianne. I'm a huge fan. I have been for a long time. The work that you've been doing in the world for so many years is trailblazing, and I just really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me about it. I'm curious about your internal process for taking what you care about so deeply in terms of raising consciousness on this planet and going into the political environment. I know I'm jumping right into the deep end of the pool right now.
Well, there's politics and then there's politics. So as Gandhi said, politics should be sacred. And by that he meant it should be collective behavior that is guided by the deepest parts of ourselves. And I've had a career for almost 30 years talking not only to individuals, but to groups of people. So I know what group conscience is. I've started some nonprofit organizations. I've seen how the wisdom of a group can emerge. I've seen how not only individuals can choose the better angels of their nature, but groups can choose the better angels of their nature. Anyone who has any kind of experience with group therapy, AA meetings, anything like that, there is such a thing as a group conscience. It's a very beautiful thing when the best of people is brought forward. I think that the democratic ideal is based on the idea, and that's really what our founder's vision was, that if people receive an education so that they have the ability for critical thought, if people are given the information they need through a free press, if people can gather to discuss what they need to discuss through peaceful assembly, then we can count on truth rising to the top. Not that the wisest decision would be made every time necessarily, but that in general, using that as a guide to the governance of the nation, the collective will of the people who had been informed, who had been educated, that is the power that should govern a nation. That is the opposite of dictatorship. That is the opposite of an authoritarian government. And it's very spiritual in nature, actually.
Yeah.
And looking to the wisdom inside people. And in my career, I've seen how you can go from that which was not wise to that which was wise, from that which was reckless to that which was well considered, from that which was fearful to that which is loving, from that which was filled with attack and blame to that which is merciful and compassionate. And that kind of movement can occur not only within individuals, but within groups. Now, we're living at a time, probably more than at any other time in history, where no individual escapes the consequences of collective decision-making that is done in the name of a group of people. So you can do all kinds of work on yourself as an individual, but if every cause has an effect, that means that the nation has a karma as much as an individual does. And if a nation's policies are unjust, or a nation's policies are in any way out of alignment with that which is healthy and that which is fair, then the repercussions of that will blow back on all of the individuals in that country ultimately. The American people are not the problem. The consciousness of the American people is not the problem. The majority of Americans want Medicare for all. The majority of Americans want free college. The majority of Americans want the cancellation of the college loan debt. The majority of Americans do want to feel that we are mitigating climate change. Problem is not the will of the American people. The problem is that we have a political system at this point which does not serve the will of the people. It does not represent the will of the people because of all the money, particularly corporate money that floods the system. It's like a cancer underlying all these problems.
Absolutely, right? So what do you see? Because you went in there now, you've been front and center in this world with this level of awareness around it. What is the tipping point? Is there a tipping point that this somehow shifts, that the big change that we've all felt coming, and that you're saying 4 out of 5 Americans want all these things. So the government isn't representing what we really want. We all know it, and it's frustrating. We're all banging our heads against the wall, and the system breeds leaders to come in and do something in a way that doesn't represent what we want. How does the change happen? Is it just slowly but surely? How would you say that this goes down?
Well, it can't be too slow at this point because we don't have a lot of time left. The status quo will not disrupt itself. The system is not going to reform itself. The people need to step in now. So this kind of interruption of pattern, this kind of break with the past is only going to happen if enough of us get involved and are willing to really put our money where our mouth is and really take a stand for what we want. So the same psychological, emotional, and spiritual principles that prevail within the journey of an individual also prevail within the journey of a nation.
Right. And in some sense, there's a level of frustration that many of us have because we feel that a lot of us have woken up, have transformed, right? Really do get that we're all in this thing together, yet the politics currently is not reflecting our best interest. But I'm curious, when you went in there, having these conversations at a very high level, at a very deep level, were you surprised? Were you having conversations like behind closed doors that surprised you? Were the people involved in running our country awake? Did they have a level of consciousness that wasn't necessarily being reflected in the political decisions that are being made?
You don't have to run for political office. All you have to do is age a few years to realize life isn't black and white. People are complicated. And sometimes basically good people are caught in sick systems. So I'm not into either in my personal relationships or in my appraisal of politics into demonizing individuals when it's so clear that the systems themselves suck.
Yeah.
And that doesn't have to do with individuals being awake or unawake. It has to do with what is essentially a sociopathic economic system, an economic system in which capitalism is completely separated from any level of core moral or ethical values and actually justifies that. And the fact that our political system is now beholden to the economic system. An economic system should serve the people. People are not born to serve an economic system. Now, some people would say, yes, but we're not in a depression, to which I would respond by quoting Martin Luther King. If it happens to rich people, they call it a depression. If it happens to poor people, they call it a social problem.